Hello everyone. So in this little video I'm going to kind of give an introduction to skeletal systems and rigging, basically kind of getting started on that journey. So there's a lot to learn about it. I mean, it's a very vast field in general. So the best thing to do is kind of take it slow, but a few things you really want to understand, things that you'll kind of run into when in doing this, that fundamentals best to kind of explain right off the get-go. Two of the biggest styles of rigging or rigging up a character or a skeletal system, there's two different types. It's forward kinematics and then inverse kinematics. And a very quick explanation of that is forward kinematics is you're going to rig up every single bone and you can rig it all the way down. Inverse kinematics works kind of like a puppeteer in terms of like you can take one bone and then link it to the third bone and then kind of work in tandem. So, and we'll kind of go over a little bit more of that, but you'll see these terms here. So I just want to kind of throw them out and put a link down below so you can kind of understand a little bit more about what it is. So, but the easiest one obviously to understand is forward kinematics. So this is basically where we're going to rig a controller up in a skeletal system as we go. Now I have this little thing rigged up here. I have my joints turned off. You can see them right there. I have them kind of nullified so you don't select them, because really, whenever you give something to an animator, if you're technical rigging, you don't want to be messing with a bunch of bones. You want to be using the controllers. The same way if you were animating a puppet, like a marionette, you don't want to be, you're going to be using the strings off site. So this right here works with forward kinematics, and basically I have you'll see my skeletal system running up the piece of geometry there. It controls every single joint that I've listed for there. This is a demonstration of forward kinematics to where I can keyframe every single one of these controllers to do independently of its own, because I have what I called constrained a controller to each one of these joint roots right here. So inverse kinematics, it's where you would basically take one controller and you would link the skeletal joints from one to another. Then they would run like, let me just do it just to demonstrate it so you don't completely lose what I'm talking about. This would be a definition of an IK handle, of an IK rig, where everything runs and then you've kind of got to set your controllers basically to control, say, a knee movement or like a bat arm movement or something like that. This is a little bit more detailed, and we'll use these with our, whenever you're doing any kind of humanoid. The way I like to rig up characters is I always like to run IK handles on the legs. And then I use forward kinematics for like the spine and the arms. It's usually just easiest the way I kind of do things. You're going to look by researching that, you're going to find that people do different things, but understanding what the difference is between these two and how to use them is more power to you. So let's get rid of that. So let's just start from scratch here. I have another iteration of Maya open over here. So say I've got my model. Let's just start with a cylinder on here. This is kind of an easy demonstration. Then we're going to do a spine or a tail of some sort. I'm going to make it give us some distance here. Just like with using a deformer, you need to have some divisions in there for this thing to be able to move. Because if not, it would just move from cap to cap, and that wouldn't make too much sense. So I'm going to give it some divisions of 20. So I have this in the middle. And this is a good exercise to walk through and do it, just kind of laying some geometry down, understanding naming conventions and grouping. And yeah, so we have our model down, our geometry. Say this is a tail. What if we want to, well, I don't have it. So let's go. Let's just start dropping some. You want to go to your rigging shelf. Create joints. Now what we're going to do is go to this box up here, look at some of these attributes. Your bone radius and your length are going to be things that you're going to want to maybe adjust on the fly depending how big your model is, and you'll see that like right now that is what they're set. If I turn these down to say 0.05 or 5, see how they're getting bigger now. So it really all depends on you on how big your model is. In terms of that, you can adjust this after the fact, but it's usually best to kind of figure that out before that. Degrees of freedom, X, Y, and Z, you want to be able to control all of that. So this is what you're going to do. The little X will come up, and then say we're just going to start laying a bone system in this thing right here. Now, if you start doing it, you're not going to be able to see it. So the best thing to do is turn your joint to where you can see your joints up here. So I'm going to create just 3 bones. Go to my very top, press enter. Now I've created a three bone system right there. So let's kind of move them around. You can really do anything right here. You can kind of select them, move them back and forth. I would not suggest setting rig skeletal systems in this perspective view because you will not get them straight. But if you notice, you can move these things in a perspective view too. But you also notice that you select this one, this whole thing is being selected there. Now, if you're familiar with the parenting and the child hierarchy, what I mean by that is the way they work. I have three pieces of geometry here. You can shift select the next one, press P, shift select the next one and press P. Now basically, instead of grouping these items together, if you look over here in your outline, they've kind of created a little structure over here to where everything's kind of running down. This can work independently of its own because it's the tail end one, or it's your the tail end one where it's the very small child. In other words, I parented that one to that one, then that one to that one. But if you move this one right here, now all of it they'll move. And the skeletal system works on that same method basically. Whenever you self-create them. Let me go back and create them. I think I'm going to create 4. So let's go create some joints. So I've created 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if I need to move this thing around, what I'm going to do I'm going to create a new layer for this guy so I can just reference him because I don't want to mess with the geometry. You're going to run into a lot of problems with selecting the geometry versus selecting the skeleton. So let's just create a layer from selected. This is going to be called my geometry. I'm just going to reference him. There we go. So now I can't select it, but I can select my skeletal system. So everything's kind of straight. You can, whenever you're laying down bones too, if you want to have them straight, you can press shift while doing this. That's how they're coming out very straight. I'm in the perspective view, which I would never do, compared to just kind of moving them around when I don't have my select. So technically I could have just pressed a shift and hit this each one time and they would have been straighter than what they are, but they're pretty straight. So the one thing you need to do is they should be all oriented straight here since I went in a front view straight up. You can go to skeleton, orient joints. They may move a little bit, but you'll find that more whenever we do start like some character rigging, like from the side and stuff like that. You want to make sure they all orient correctly. If you have a piece of geometry that's going like in a curve, you want to make sure everything is, and what that means is like all the y-axes are pointing up and all the x-axes are going one way, and the joints as a whole aren't moved to different places. So here is where we start to getting out of control with all of our joints. And I mean that by because, you know, in a basic rig, you'll have quite a bit of joints. So the best thing to do is start keeping a handle on these things as you go along. Say this is my spine. You can actually kind of start referencing these things as a whole. So in other words, search and replace names. I'm going to search for joints. I'm going to replace them with spline underscore. So what that did is basically that renamed it, and it doesn't seem very feasible here in this since it's one, but if you've got a right leg, a left leg, or right leg, you can name it right underscore first joint, and so on, so on. So if you notice now, all these joints will move in tandem with your root joint down here, this being your first joint, but you could also move these things independently because they're all parented to the one behind it. Now if you wanted to move that one like that, so it works the same way as I just demonstrated with the geometry box. So just to show you how this thing goes, and we'll do some more skin binding because I don't want to do this after the fact I've created some controllers. I'm going to go ahead and bind this to the skin up here so you can see how it moves with the geometry. So I'm going to unreference the geometry here. I'm going to select all my controller, all my joints here. And I'm going to select my geometry. I'm going to go bind to skin. That made them change different colors, and we'll get into more painting weights basically with the joints. But if you notice, now I start moving these joints, the geometry is actually kind of weighted itself to the actual bones itself. And if you do this first off, if you have some weird bends in the geometry, don't fret. That is common because you have to go in there and kind of paint these vertexes to kind of start not tearing as much whenever you the controllers. If you bring this up, you'll see how that works. You can kind of start painting the controllers to it. It's pretty cool. I think I needed to. Cool. We'll get into that later, though. I can get out of it. There we go. So let me undo, straighten this back up here. There it was. It was kind of starting to be black, and just want to get it straight. I can get my controllers. Cool. Now I'm going to go reference my geometry again. So all right. So now you could actually animate this. I wouldn't suggest animating these joints. I would create controllers for these things. So controllers are all those little circles, those little curves and surface curves. You see all over these models that you've created. You've got these controllers. Let's create one down below. I don't see it because I got to scale it up. There it is. This is going to be my root controller, my spine controller. I'm basically going to link this controller to the actual skeleton itself here, to this joint here. But I'm just not going to parent it though. I want to constrain these things. We'll talk about constraining here in a minute. So I'm going to create one here, one there, one there, and one there. So I'm just going to control duplicate and these things right in the middle. You can snap these things to the middle if you want. I do know that my pivot point is directly 0 space. So I know my skeleton, my joint is probably 0 space. It's not going to be far off, but if this was like a shoulder and you wanted the controller like way over here, you could do this and then move this controller, move it like this. So whenever you moved the controller, it would be moving the joint here. But since everything is in 0 space right now, we don't need to worry about it. So I'm just going to kind of move it up like this and scale it down. Make another one. Scale it down even more. All right. So now the big thing is, this is going to be the end of our tail, and we're going to need all these controllers basically to follow this root controller, just like in tandem with the skeletal system. Now we do that separately though. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that these things have no history on them, because if you were to move these things, you want these things to be in zero space. You notice that the translate is different on them. You need these things zeroed out. That's always a big thing with the controllers. Zero out your controllers before you constrain them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all the history on them, and I'm going to freeze the transformation. So that way there's zeros. So if I needed to ever bring this model back to this position, I could just basically type in 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent these down the chain. P, P, P. So same thing over here. It's got a little hierarchy chain that runs it all down. Now you can go over here and you can search for NURBS circle, replace them with controller. There we go. So now this kind of runs, these are going to be my controllers I'm going to be able to run this forward kinematics with, but I need to attach the skeletal system to them. And you'll not be doing that by parenting. We'll be doing that by constraining up here. And we'll talk a lot more about, difference between point and orient and parent and scale. But for right now, the biggest thing what a parent constraint is going to do, it's going to constrain basically the point and the orient to the joint. So we want both of these actually working for this, which in turn runs the translation and the rotation of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select controller. I'll kind of go in here and select this joint here. Sometimes I gotta just want that joint. You could basically go here and select them like this. So I'm going to constrain. Let's look at this box here. So you want to maintain the offset. You want all the translate to be affected and the rotate. So I'm going to apply it. Why is it not doing? Am I not doing some sort of step right? It's doing, but where is, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have it uncollapsed. So basically now, let me do this to make sure that I did it. Delete that. So select the controller that I want to select the joint that I want it to constrain to, pressing shift, or you can go select them, pressing shift over here in the outline. Constrain, parent, maintain offset, apply. So now basically kind of this chain link has come up, which stands for parent constraint. So if you notice, every time I move this joint, this controller now, the joint moves the same way it moves the controller. So I want to do that for all 3 of these, or all 4 of these basically. So controller 3 to spline 3. I want to press G to repeat that process. Another one, controller 2 to spline, controller 2 to spline 2, pressing G, controller 1 to spline 1. That's the whole thing. So now let's test this thing. So we got a roach, not that way. moves this way, that moves tandemly like that, that moves tandemly like that. Things working out. That looks really good. Okay, control it like that. You notice your spline over here, what happens whenever you put the constraint on there, you see the translate and the rotate. That means it doesn't control the scale or the visibility, which is what I want. So say you have your tail ready to animate. Now, here's some ways of kind of cleaning this up over here that I would suggest doing. You have your geometry to where you can't select it, because I don't want to be selecting my geometry when I'm trying to animate this. So I have this referenced out, which is fine. You're going to want to do that to your joints over here. So what you can do is select all your joints, and you're going to Control G, and I'll call this the joint group. Basically, you don't want to touch. You can put labels on here saying like animator, don't touch this, whatever, however you want to do. The only thing that you're going to be messing with when you're animating is these controllers right here. But what you can do with these groupings right here is you can lock stuff out. Say I don't want to adjust the scale of these things. I don't want these things messed like that at all. So I can select this whole group here and lock these scale. Actually, you may want to, let me see if I'm supposed to do this. Yeah, so you can't mess with it at all. The only thing that you can mess with are these right here. So this way you can't even mess with any of the joints at all, basically. You could go in and delete them, yeah, but, you know. So that is a quick rundown of basically how to add what the bones are and how to add the skeletal system in there. Of getting things straight here. You want to go and control or make these, label these how you want to. So I'm going to end the video with that right there. And the next one, I'm going to get into kind of animating these things separately, like making this tail wag or this thing fly around. So you can see how the controllers, the biggest point is if you hit a keyframe there for this controller, it's not going to key these controllers here. You basically have to select all these controllers to set keyframes for separately, and we'll go over that. Plus I want to show you some of the painting weights and stuff like that. So okay, so and we'll get into IK rigs with our character rigging too. So but okay, that's really brief on how to create the systems and everything like that. So yeah, we'll see you next time.